Hey, one more thing before you go. Have you ever wondered how to rediscover your purpose? How do you learn to merge psychology and spirituality to move yourself forward in a positive way? Do you want to learn how to master and harness your energy? Stay tuned. We're going to have a conversation with a woman that has discovered her purpose in helping others tune into an energetic frequency where everything just clicks. And she's going to help you understand how to do that as well. I'm your host, Michael Hurst. Welcome to One More Thing Before You Go. My guest in this episode is Gabrielle Pimstone. She's an energy coach who is dedicated to assisting those on the cusp of change, but in the need of that crucial nudge forward. Her story, Finding Your Inner Hero, A Journey Beyond Burnout. We're going to talk about that story today. It narrates her journey of resilience and reinvention, highlighting 6 defining moments. She offers inspiration and practical tips to individuals to break free from stagnation and fear. Her central message is that it's never too late to make meaningful life change. Gabrielle worked in a corporate psychology career for about 27 years, but a chance podcast encounter altered the course of her life, just like it did for me. We have a lot in common. She's now an energy coach helping those feeling burnt out and stuck. She teaches powerful energy techniques for self-healing and navigating major life transitions so people can live life with renewed purpose. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael. It's wonderful to be here.
What is an amazing journey? It's just a brilliant journey. It's like wow, everything you've accomplished, and obviously with change after a 27-year career, that had to be, I would say, a little bit of traumatic as well as a little bit of self-satisfaction as well as a little more. You know.
Yes, yes, it was. Look, it wasn't I didn't just switch, flick a switch and things changed. It was building up over the course of a number of years, probably I'd say about 5 years. I had an incredible career, Michael. It was very embedded in my identity, probably a little bit too much. Um,
I can
and
relate to that.
Yeah, I know you can. I know. It filled so many, it ticked so many boxes. Intellectually, I was also able to be a service. The pay was great. It was all of those things. But what actually happened was about 5 years before I made the switch, things stopped resonating. The career that once really gave me so much vitality started to wane into almost insignificance. I got to a point in 2020, which is when I listened to that podcast, where I actually felt incredibly challenging hauling myself into it was the pandemic at the time, but into the virtual office. And even, Zoom meetings became a struggle. Everything was just I'd lost the joy in what I was doing. And it was incredibly stressful because it was linked to my identity. Who was I without this?
Right.
Yeah. And so when I finally did make the transition, there were a couple of feelings. The one was relief because I'd been living with immense pressure, immense stress and anxiety, and I was depressed for a long time. And the other one was fear. So the anxiety shifted into, it kind of shape shifted into a different anxiety. And so those were the two primary emotions. But I'm glad your podcast is, and you're so focused on purpose because it was my purpose that gave me the anchor and helped me
Yeah.
take a step forward every day. It was my beacon. And I don't mean that in the cliched sense. I mean that really it was. I knew in the depths of me I was doing the right thing. But change is tough and we all have to weather that initial kind of disorientation. It just disorients everything in you. And my identity was shifting. That was a big one.
Yeah, I absolutely can relate to that. As we had a conversation before we started, and everybody knows I had to redefine my purpose based upon circumstances that were little bit different, but in reality, kind of the same. Because I think as human beings and we in society and culture, there are certain expectations that we have
Yeah.
of us in regard to a career that we may have gone into or what other people expect of us. And if
Yeah.
we don't want to meet that expectation any longer for whatever reason, then obviously it creates a stepping stone as to a choice that we have to make whether or not we want to step up or step down, kind of a
Yes.
situation. But hey, I
Yes.
like to kind of, if you don't mind, if we can backtrack just a little bit.
Sure.
Where'd you grow up?
I actually, can you hear? I don't actually have an Australian accent.
It
I
sounds more,
live,
yeah, South African or New
yes,
Zealand.
yes, South African. That's interesting that I grew up in Cape Town, South Africa, the southernmost tip of Africa. I was actually there in December because my mum and one of my brothers still live there. It's an incredible place. So, yeah, I grew up there. I feel very privileged to have grown up there. And in actual fact, my experience growing up in apartheid South Africa has helped me shape my purpose today, which is, you know, a lovely link. It's a nod, I guess, to my childhood experience.
Where you at? So, well, yes, I luckily I lived in when I worked here as a cop. I met a lot of people from all over the world.
Right.
So that's where my ear comes from. People from Scotland, all tourists, people from
I'm
Scotland,
impressed.
all over the place. So yeah, it's I kind of pick. I love accents. I love to pick them up. I love
I've
to
still
kind of.
got a sphere. I left Cape Town in 1994 and I've got a strong accent still. But I
Well,
can code switch. When I'm ordering coffee, I sound Australian.
yeah, it's hard, probably hard not to kind of slip into it. I guess living there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where'd you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a vet because ever since I was a young child, I loved animals. I had a deep sensitivity towards animals. I actually became a bit of an animal activist at a young age, and I wanted to be a vet. But at that stage, when I was deciding what I wanted to do, it was the thought of seeing, animal abuse, pain, and suffering, having to put down animals just wasn't, I just couldn't do it. So I chose my other love, which is psychology and serving other people, helping people step into the best version of themselves. And this was the link to growing up in apartheid South Africa because I saw so many incredibly gifted, talented, wonderful Black South Africans who didn't have the privilege of decent education and who were trapped in dead end jobs and unable to actualize. And so it really became a passion of mine to help me find a profession where I could help people step into the best version of themselves, at least psychologically and spiritually.
That's amazing, actually. I think that unfortunately, in today's society, it's all over the world. It may be in different forms or just slightly different forms. Here in America, we have the same thing. We've got individuals.
Yeah,
As a law enforcement officer, we had the areas of town that were very oppressed, and they were, especially Black communities and Latin communities, Asian communities, that didn't have the same opportunities as all of us had in regard to, or come from a very very dysfunctional family
yeah.
environment that also helped to suppress that. So kudos, thank you for taking that opportunity to help people in a positive way from that. I'm sure you brought some of those skills with you forward to what you do today. You brought the skill and that empathy and the compassion.
Yeah, compassion. I can't say empathy because I've not been in that position. I've had privilege and I'm acutely aware of it. Well, not that I haven't had to work for everything in my life, but at least I was
Right.
afforded education. That really got me off to a good start. So I think compassion and one of my core values is justice. I'm really curious that when you said you were an ex-police cop, trying to address the imbalance in life. And you see it everywhere. That's
Yeah.
why, being an animal activist when I was young was so important to me. Speaking up for the voiceless,
Mhm.
doing that for children, for the
Yeah.
aged, and also helping people redress the psychological imbalance as well. People who've had a poor start to life, poor parenting, um, living in lower socioeconomic
Right.
contexts that has really stymied them. It's really exciting to me to give them an opportunity to actualize, and that's one of the
Yeah.
big things. And that's what drives me for sure.
I mean, that's an amazing opportunity for you from the inside out. I'm sure that makes your soul feel good because it really,
Makes
yeah. I mean, I enjoyed that. Even in my old profession, I got into it for a reason. I got into it to help people from a different perspective, not from a psychological perspective, but from a different perspective in taking people out of situations that I felt that they deserved to be not to be in, and to move them forward in such a way, or provide them opportunity to be able to get out of that situation. And I know how
yeah.
that made me feel. You did it on a much larger scale, I think, in much deeper. I mean, apartheid is, if anybody, hopefully we all understand what that is and where it comes from. But to be able to present people the opportunity for change in a positive way has got to be satisfying to your soul.
Very, very much so. Very, very much so. Yeah, it's humbling as well. It's very humbling. And even though I haven't, lived there for a while, I'm still very connected at an
Right.
energetic level to South Africa. I, was born there, grew up there. I was socialized there. And as I said, I've got family members who still
Right.
live there. So energetically, I'm really connected and tied. And as we're talking, I'm thinking I should probably do more, but you know,
We're
we
only
all
human,
do.
right? We
We're
can
only
do
human,
what we can do.
right?
So may I ask you? You have a psychology degree?
I have a psychology degree. I'm not a psychologist. I went up to the level of honors in university, which I decided straight afterwards that I didn't want to study. I wanted to get real life experience. I didn't want to be a clinical psychologist. I wanted to go work in organizations. So I've worked in what's called organization development, but I'm very psychologized. I am trained in a number of, like Jungian techniques. I've been working on myself in therapy for years, and so it's a field of psychology. That's how I like to describe it.
So how did, if I can ask, how did you come about to recognize the energy work, and how did you get into? Have you always been in any? Let me try that in English. I got all these things running through my head like 100 miles a minute.
I know the feeling.
How did you come about understanding energy and how it works within our body and how to balance that energy? I mean, was there something? Did something happen? I mean, I know that you said that a podcast changed your life. Is that kind of where that recognition came from?
Well, no, that the recognition didn't come from there, but the podcast was absolutely the catalyst. So I've always had obviously a strong psychological bent, but also a bit of a spiritual bent. Like after my father passed away, I remember I was young, I was 10, asking my mother, can I go to a medium? I want to speak to dad. And she said no at the time. I was curious, and I was very intrigued by my dreams. I had a couple of experiences where I felt the wider consciousness that people talk about. I had a couple of experiences, but I never really pursued it. And psychology was everything. My career was everything. But what happened in 2020 when I was so anxious? I was, in this job that was it was really breaking me, and I took myself off that morning because what I'd done is I tried to use all the typical psychological techniques that I was accustomed to using to get me out of a trough. They weren't working, so I went on a walk, put on my AirPods, and listened to this podcast. Basically, in a nutshell, the woman was talking about living with crippling anxiety, even in the most joyful moments. She was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. And it was a real awakening, because I realized then and there that I have a tendency towards being anxious, and this corporate world is amplifying that, and I've got to do something about it. So that was the catalyst. In terms of energy work, though, I've got an algorithm cookie to thank for that. Sometimes you think something and then like an advert shows up on your Instagram feed. That's what happened to me. And in the advert, this guy was talking about how energy is everything, and how if you really want epic transformation, you've got to work at an energetic level. And I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. And there was something in his energy that resonated. So I went on a 3 day, they have those weekend workshops, went on a 3 day workshop, and the message really landed. And then I understood that actually that had been the missing link, and that if I pivot and start learning more about how I master my energy, maybe I can get myself out of my fear and out of the rut that I was in.
That's it. It's interesting how the universe puts something in front of us that I think the spirituality aspect of that is the inclination that sometimes we just need to open our eyes and open our ears and open our hearts, and what we're looking for might be right in front of us.
It's so true what you're saying, Michael, because, and I mean, I've never really been into this until the last few years, that there are signs and synchronicities happening all around us. And you're right. We just have to be alive to them. And, most of us aren't. So I happen to be I was at the bottom of the barrel, desperate state. So I was alive. I was grasping at straws. And thankfully I was, because the gift was right there for me
Was
to
right there
take.
for you.
And by the way, that guy landed up becoming my teacher. I studied under him for 18 months. And I
Yeah, very
became an
cool.
energy master, which is really cool.
Very, very
Cool
cool.
gift.
Let's talk about energy. I mean, you were at a point in your life where you needed a little nudge, as you had we mentioned earlier, like in the intro. You needed a little nudge, and that little nudge was presented to you by this individual that talked about energy work. I think we all are energy. I mean, at least from what I understand, we are again English. We are all energy. And in understanding we are all energy, I know that we can manipulate that energy. I go through acupuncture treatments, and the doctor that does this for me, I've had two Asian doctors that help me with that, and they both talk about the fact that all that is realigning my energy. And that's what the needles are
Yes.
for. They realign the energy and the meridians in my body, and they're all constantly moving around. So
Yes.
when you work with somebody with energy healing, in essence, you kind of do that.
I do a lot of things. I do a number of things. You're right, by the way, that energy is everything. Energy runs the show. It's absolutely everything. So I've been working with thoughts, mindsets, identity, behaviors, emotions, all of that over my career. But actually, all that is energy. So you're absolutely right about that. What I do when I help people, well, there are two things. I mean, my offerings are several fold. Sometimes people just want to come in and get me to do the work for them. And when I do that, I'm doing a particular thing, and I'll talk to you about what that is. But what I actually prefer is teaching people how to do it for themselves, and how to master their own energy, because I can heal them, but we've got multitude of issues. And I don't want people coming back all the time. I want people to actually find the way to master themselves. So when I'm healing people, I'm doing two things. If I'm doing all the work, I am releasing energetic blocks. Okay, we've all got deeply held energy blocks that have, kind of grow and compound over time. They sit in our energetic body, and I am removing them for people. I'm finding the inception point, because I can read energy, and I am releasing and removing them and replacing them with a different energetic frequency. So I'm doing that. And in doing so, when we've got a block, say if we've got a block in our heart chakra, once that's removed, and I have to balance out all the chakras as well. But I'm doing that not just in the here and now, I work across your whole timeline. So if you've got a childhood event, I can go back there. I can release the inception point if that's where it is. I can even go back to the womb, gestation, or even I can heal intergenerational blocks and traumas. So no matter where the inception point is, I'll find it and release it. The other thing I'm doing when I'm doing it for people is I'm activating energy, because we've all got latent potential, dormant potential in us, dormant gifts, dormant frequency that we just don't use. And I have the capacity to activate that actually at a cellular level. And what that does is it activates change, it activates manifestation, all those groovy things. So it's a twofold process. I'm releasing the block and I'm activating dormant potential. So that's what I'm doing when I'm doing it to you. When I'm teaching people how to master their energy, I'm teaching them 5 things. How do you understand, read, and sense your energy, understand your energy, how to protect your energy from what's going on around you, it's a big skill, how to clear, how to do that removal process, how to maintain your energy so that you don't dip all the time or don't dip too far, and how to optimize and expand your energy for greater growth. So yeah, that's the difference between what I'm doing, if I'm doing it to you or if I'm doing it with you and teaching you.
From that perspective. You brought a couple of things, very interesting things. We've talked about energy from a different perspective in regard to, you mentioned chakras. So
Yeah.
chakras, typically from the conversations that I've had, chakras related to Reiki. So is Reiki and the chakras, and are they both kind of relative to energy movement, or do you do Reiki, or do you just kind of manipulate chakras with your energy?
I don't do Reiki. Reiki is another form of energy healing. I use a form of energy healing that uses more advanced sacred geometry than Reiki does. So Reiki uses symbols. I actually use much more advanced sacred geometry. It's more potent, it goes deeper, and I can work across the timeline as well. A number of people who I studied with are Reiki practitioners, and they said this is like Reiki dialed up. So it's very potent energy that I'm working with. It's instantaneous, it's fast, and it's lasting. So once I remove the root of the block, it's gone for good. So it is different. It's different to Reiki. But yes, I always start every healing working with the chakras, and then I move on from there. Okay,
From
because
that
our
perspective.
energetic bodies, it's more than that. But what I've got to sense, I've got to see what's going on in the energetic body. Um, I get guided to go elsewhere and to
From that
sometimes I go
perspective.
along the timeline. It's difficult to explain
No, no, I
in a short
understand.
podcast, but yeah, but it does always start with a chakra clearing and balancing, always, and then
Now,
I move on.
when you work with somebody with their chakras, for example, do you see the chakras? Because you said you kind of have to visualize. Do
Yeah.
you see the imbalances within those chakras?
So we all have different spiritual senses, okay? So the clairvoyance is the ability to see, clairaudience to hear, and then clairsentience is to feel. I actually, when I'm reading chakras, I do see, yes, but I also have a very strong sense. So I have a felt sense of what is going on that takes over me. There's no other way to put it. So, I'll give you an example. I was reading someone a while ago, and I actually saw a big top hat. And when I replayed this, I didn't know what it was above the crown. And there was a moment where they went, "Oh, wow, that is really profound." Because what I didn't know is, it was like a religious person's top hat. I didn't, this person actually has a really religious side to them. And so we spoke about how to strengthen their connectivity to the universe, to God, whatever. And so how I saw their spirituality was through a top hat on their above the crown of their head. And sometimes when I go in, I get a sense of what it means. Other times I've got to ask the person, which was in this case, and then the conversation turned into spirituality. So, yeah, I mean, I see and I sense. Sometimes I also smell, occasionally, not often. That's a spiritual sense. Um, uh, for example, I can't, I smelt, there was a very strong, overpowering sense of dust when working with somebody. I felt like, I wanted to, choke. And
Right.
there was stuff in the throat chakra that needed. And so that is what I cleared. And that is what we processed in our dialogue and a debrief afterwards. So it's a mixture of different spiritual gifts.
Well, from there, what's the difference between an aura and chakra? Is it, from that perspective?
Yeah, well, your chakras are energy centers. It's where energy coalesces in your energetic body. And we've got hundreds of them, but we typically work with seven primary ones. I also work with the ears as well. It's an energy center that has a particular, each energy center houses energy related to a particular aspect of us. So for example, the heart chakra will house energy that is related to love, relationships, all of that stuff, whereas the crown chakra will house energy related to spiritual connection. So they energy centers. Your aura, think of it as almost like an energetic skin. It's, they say, I mean, we've all got different size auras, but it sits around us 18 to 20 inches, centimeters, I think it is. And think of it as your skin. It's like the first line of defense. So when we pick up energy from the outside and energetic blocks start to form, they start in your aura and then they go deeper and deeper and deeper until they hit your chakras. So it's a different part of your energetic body.
From that perspective, that's interesting. Really, I think that it's. I know that when I go to, I mean, I've been to a Reiki individual, and again, the acupuncture really works for me.
It's
So I do
incredible.
understand the balancing of the energy from the meridian perspective in helping to relieve pain for me, for example, with my arthritis with the
Yeah,
rheumatoid.
right.
Yeah, in doing that, in doing your kind of energy work, at what point? Let me get the right question here. The How does that help us find our inner self? Like you have an inner, you found your inner hero, so to speak. You have a journey that you have done, your inner hero, and it was a journey beyond burnout in regard to that. So how did energy work help you find your inner hero, and how can that help somebody like me or somebody who's listening or watching out here find their inner hero?
That's such an incredibly well put question. Thanks, for asking it.
Mhm.
So energy energy blocks, it's energetic, okay, but they manifest in stories we tell ourselves. They manifest in limiting beliefs. They manifest in poor decisions and patterns. They manifest in things we can actually experience, right? But what they do, and I was writing as you were talking, so I'm just looking down at it, they block your essence. Okay, so for example, I had an energy block that was related to dread and anxiety. I actually felt it was in my sacral chakra, kind of between my sacral and my solar plexus. And it became the prism through which I experienced life. It determined the story that I told myself, how I perceived myself, how I perceived others, how I perceived the world as an unsafe place. Now, when you've got that clouding you, and shaping your every experience, and you remove it, you open yourself up to the most incredible relief, expansion, peace, the ability to serve yourself and others. So it's really like taking a veil off. There's no other way to describe it, and that's how my experience was of working at an energetic level. Like releasing a prism or shifting the putting on a different pair of glasses. There's no other way to put it.
It's. I think that we all in life at some point in our lives we are going to experience or understand burnout. We all get burned out, whether it be i- as simple as the job that you're going to, you've learned to not like. In some cases, you've learned to hate going to your job. I've talked to people, even on this podcast, I've talked to people who say, I hate going to work. I really don't want to go to work tomorrow for whatever reason. And they say, why? Because I'm burnt out. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of this. I'm tired of the grind. I'm tired of driving an hour into work. And I'm tired of, trudging along for 8.5 hours during the daytime and then having to face the traffic coming home again. I'm just kind of done with that. And at the same time, it can happen. And when I say this, I look. I'm a parent. My wife is a parent. I understand that sometimes we as parents or people that stay home and raise our kids, sometimes we get burned out because you have a monotony every day. Sometimes you fall into a routine, and sometimes that routine becomes monotony, and you can get burnt out from many different aspects. How do we recognize that we're in burnout? I mean, I know that you did. You come up to a point where you kind of
Yeah.
had to take a walk, and then you listen to a podcast, and that's what. But are there any signs or symptoms that we can recognize that we are
Yeah.
experiencing burnout and that we need to take an action?
Yes, yes, that's a great question. Thanks, Michael. Yes, so just so that this is how I see and I've experienced burnout, it's more than feeling tired. It's actually more than feeling sick of something, it's feeling overwhelmed. So, the definition that I work with when it comes to burnout is it's when the demands of the situation exceed your capacity to deal with them. Now, there are two things that we can do, okay? We can either reduce the demands placed on us, and that's not always possible, or we can increase our capacity to deal with the demands, which is where energy work comes in. Now, so if it's a state of overwhelm, it's quite easy to pinpoint. In my case, the overwhelm symptomatically came in the form of insomnia, couldn't sleep, a constant kind of pit sense of dread in my stomach, that butterfly feeling, tachycardia. That I'm just talking about, for me. I also became a bit of a hermit. I withdrew from the world around me because I had no energy. I had just enough energy to show up on that next Zoom call. Now, that's so when you're in a state of overwhelm, you're going to know it. For me, it was very, very obvious. Question is not whether you know it, it's whether you act on it. And if I'm honest, it took me a little bit of time, quite a number of years, to read the signs. And that's normal, change is tough. We tend to continue doing what we've always done until it becomes untenable, until we get feedback from the outside that, whoa, this is not I'd like to change. This is, I've got to change. And so you'll know. And I mean, there are various ways that overwhelm and burnout can manifest. I've just shared what happened for me.
And I know that you mix psychology because obviously you bring forward with you your passion for that because you had a passion for psychology during that time period, and I understand why the burnout. I do understand that because even from the perspective that I came from in law enforcement, got to a point where I was working the domestic violence for 4 years straight, and that's all you work with. By the tail end of that, it was like I need a break. I
Yeah.
need to walk away from this for a little bit and do something different because I got to a point where I was going, I appreciate what I'm doing and I value what I'm doing. And I know that I'm making a contribution, taking people out of situations that they don't belong in and helping people move forward from that. But at the same time, it's like that you go home and it weighs upon you and it weighs upon you and it weighs upon
Ways.
you, it
It's
weighs
that
upon you.
weighing. That's exactly it, Michael. The
Oh,
sense
yeah.
of being the weight. That's a great clue.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I think that it forces you to make a choice or to evaluate your position or what you want to do. Luckily, I had
Yes.
choices within the law enforcement community that I could say, hey, going to the lieutenant, say, I think I need to change, and we need to try to do something else, and then we've got different divisions that you could go, okay, well, we can put you in this division or whatever. But not everybody has that opportunity to be able to do that. Not everybody has the the structure within their organization, if whatever it happens to be able to go and say, hey, can I move a department or can I change my job and do something else? So I'm sure that when you deal with people, when you work with people, you use, you can see my hands moving here.
Yes.
My Italian hands are moving, which you
Are
can't
you
see.
Italian? Okay.
The I know that you bring psychology forward and you take that and mix it with energy mastery to help people tune into the energetic frequency where everything kind of clicks, as we mentioned earlier when I first introduced you. I'm just glancing at my notes. So when we realize that we need to make a choice or make that change, and we realize we've reached that point where we're either burnt out or we recognize that we need to take a step out of where we're at right now to rebalance our energy. I mean, what do you see the first step would somebody would need to do in order to kind of recognize that they need to do that?
Well, firstly, I want to say that we don't all, as you kind of alluded, we don't all have the choice to change careers. I had the
Right.
privilege and the choice of doing it. So did you. You shifted, but that's not always available to us. So that's a different conversation that we can kind of go down if you want. But I
Please.
think the first step is there are a couple of things. It's kind of a mixture of push and pull, isn't it? So things have got to typically get really bad where the status quo becomes untenable, but that's not enough. You've got to have a compelling vision of a different future, a purpose,
Mm.
something beyond the present that actually pulls you out. It's a motivating factor. So I actually think it's a conversation, it's an honest conversation you have with yourself about, where am I at? Simply, where do I want to be? And what's gotten in the way. It sounds like a simple conversation, but it requires of us to be honest with ourselves. That's why working with a coach can be so helpful, or working with a trusted friend or family member who knows you. So somebody who can hold up the mirror. And then it's, you've got to work out what do you actually want to be doing. You can't just work out what you don't want to be doing, and then you've got to have an honest reflection about what's gotten in the way, and then work on the things that are getting in the way. That's kind of, I would say, an archetypal standard process I would take every client through. That doesn't vary. Of course, the content varies, but that's what transformation and transition is about, moving from
From
A
that
to
perspective,
B.
yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, yeah.
How do you feel? Do you think that this is just based on your experience? Do you think burnout is something that in this day and age, I mean, the pressures, even from 25 years ago or 20 years ago, kind of a situation. I think the pressures of society, the pressures of what's going on in the world, have created a larger environment for burnout.
I can only speak for my own lifetime.
Yeah,
I've been feeling burnout since I was a kid.
I
Because I faced into a dad, a father, a beloved parent who was ill and then who died. So I'm not sure about that. But I do sometimes look at the young kids of today. Sorry, I've got a frog in my throat.
that's okay.
I do sometimes look at, like one of my nieces who's just started university, and it's actually more competitive getting in. It's just more pressurized on so many levels. So yeah, I think it does have something to do with generation. I do. But having said that, I'm my early 50s, and I've been on this planet for a long time, and I've been experiencing high levels of burnout. Well, I was experiencing high levels of burnout ever since I was a child. So I'm not quite sure how to answer that. I'm not sure, but it definitely is an epidemic. What's available to us now that was never available then was psychology and energy work and alternative ways of
Yeah.
moving through these impasses. I encourage whoever's listening, who's feeling it, to find something that you feel is going to get you through it and take the support you need, because those weren't necessarily available to me, which is probably why I lived for decades with a sense of
Right.
overwhelm and angst. So, yeah, I'm not sure I answered your question.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, I think that the pressures of today, I think, have expanded upon themselves for the expectations of what we
Yeah,
expect our children, our kids, or even from their perspective, what they expect from adults. Their
yeah,
parents or grandparents, and siblings and
yeah,
so forth. I think we as society have allowed those pressures to continue to build. Because now,
yeah,
again, I agree with you. It's more competitive to get into college and universities. It's
yeah,
more competitive
yeah.
for jobs. It's more I mean, I don't know how it is in Australia, but even here, it's more competitive even to get a place to live. You know,
Oh,
um,
yes.
it's
Oh,
crazy.
yes.
My
Yes.
daughters, our oldest daughter, they've applied to something like they're in a situation where the townhome that they live in, the owner's selling the townhome, so they gave him like 60 days and said, "Hey, we're going to give you plenty of time to look." And they've gone to these open houses and these people that are applying, and they see that 60, 70 people are applying for one apartment or for
Yeah,
one townhouse to,
yeah.
to live in. The
Same here.
competition is, I mean, and how do you go into that with the apprehension, like, how am I ever going to get through this? Kind of deal.
We've
So I
got
think,
we've got that. I wish I could bring up easily. There was a photo in the newspaper this weekend about the rental crisis in Sydney, which was also like a line snaking around
oh, it's
the
amazing.
block of people. I one of the neighbors just sold. One of my neighbors just sold her unit, and she sold it for $400,000 more than the asking price, because there
Wow.
was such a bidding war,
That's
and
crazy.
then you price people out the market, and it just has a knock-on effect. So yes, I think we're living with more pressure, but it's interesting because in the corporate world, when I had started out, there was a particular path you had to follow. There were, you had to do what was asked of you.
Yeah.
Kids of today are a little bit more bolshy, are able to say
Yeah.
no easier. So, like, there's a part of me that wonders, why, if you're saying no and you've got your boundaries, which I never had, I just had
Right.
to do what I was told. Why is there a sense of so much overwhelm and stress and pressure? I don't know. I'm not sure. So, I don't think it's a clear cut answer, but yeah, it's an epidemic, that's for sure.
Well, and I think
So,
that has an effect on our energy overall, and our
it
energy within
definitely does.
ourselves, and our energy in relation to other individuals. That's the only reason I brought that
Yes.
question up. I think that energetically it creates an environment that people lose their tempers, people get angry, people get mad, people get. I mean, I think that balancing, learning to balance our energy, learning to balance what's within ourselves will help
Yes.
us to manage our lives from many, many perspectives, not just necessarily burnout, but other complications within life that may
That's right.
arise, like we were just talked about, like trying to find a place to live.
Yes.
Nobody wants to be without a place to live or a roof over your head. And when you get situated where you kind of go, oh, I'm comfortable, I have a roof over my head, and this is a nice place to live. And then all of a sudden you got, well, you don't really, you got to move. Then that creates an imbalance in our energy system because, it, so yeah, the tools, to be able to provide the tools for people to be able to understand that energy. I mean, they say money's energy. They say money's energy. They say everything is energy. I know that
Everything.
plants have energy. And understanding how to balance that and move energy, I think, is a tool that we can learn in order to betterly
Very much so.
affect ourselves and those around us. From
Very,
that.
very much so. I mean, and the balance is so important, because even too much of a good frequency has
Yeah.
its shadow side. So, like, we think about fun. and laughter. That's a high vibrational,
Yeah.
aspirational frequency. But if that's our dominant state all the time, it has a shadow side. There's so many
Yeah.
downsides to that. So the balance is absolutely right. So when we talk about energetic blocks, when I say the word a block, you probably think of something that's shrunk, small. But actually, a block can show up in your chakras as either a small chakra or an enlarged chakra when you've got an excess of something. So, for example, think about the solar plexus, okay, which is the seat of our sense of agency, of control, our sense of autonomy. That's where it comes from. The solar plexus, that between your belly button and your heart. Now, when you have a block and that is creating too little of that energy, you feel disempowered, apathetic, passive. But when you've got too much of it, you can come across as domineering, dominating, or authoritarian, you're control freak, perfectionism, all of that stuff starts rearing its head. So actually, some of the work that I'm doing is when I'm balancing chakras, I'm getting them to the optimal size, and they must all be in alignment with each other as well, because too much or too little can have a devastating effect. So I just wanted to clarify that too much of anything creates blocks as well.
It's always about balance. It's always about
It's
balance.
always about balance,
It's that old
always.
cliche, yin and yang. The yin and yang, the black and the
Yes,
white. It's always
yes,
about balance. I
yeah,
think that, and that's in everything that we do in life. I think it's all about balance. What kind of tools do you think, or what kind of tools would you recommend that we as individuals maybe adopt or can seek out or learn that can help us when we recognize an energy imbalance? If we don't, we, we may not always have the opportunity to go to a coach, or may not always have the opportunity to go to someone to help us. Could you recommend any tools that we could use?
yeah, yeah. Yes, well, of course, the sacred geometry would be my go-to tools, but here, and as you say, that's not available to everyone. So there are a couple of things that all of us can do. I am a firm believer in the power of intention. It's how the energy world works. Everything happens with intention and at the speed of intention. So if you want to release an energetic block, you can get yourself into the right non-resistant state. Do something that puts you there. Maybe go sit in your garden. I don't know, meditate, whatever it gets you there. Get into a non-resistant energetic state. Maybe put your hand over your heart and just say, universe, God, whatever you believe in, guides of the highest truth. I set the intention to release the biggest block holding me back right now. Or if you have a particular block that you are working on, for example, maybe abundance blocks, you just set the intention in the highest good of all to release your blocks to financial abundance. So you can get quite specific with it and then do that regularly, 7 to 21 days, every day, sitting with that heartfelt intention. The other way that you can do it it's a similar technique, but it speeds things up, is to do that in your sleep. We do an incredible amount of healing through our dreams, but we just don't pay attention to it. I've been working with my dreams for 4 decades. It's a long time.
4 decades is a good answer.
Yeah. And he said 40 decades. And, before you go to sleep at night, do the same thing, but get into state and address your dream tonight as I sleep. Help me release the biggest block that is holding me back in finding the love of my life, or in getting the job that I love, or finding my purpose, whatever the issue is that you want to work on. You can do that from a heartfelt state just before you go to sleep, and then sleep. And then the minute you wake up, you take your pen and paper out and you document what has come up overnight. And the more you practice this, the more you get in touch with that intuitive voice through your dreams, but the more you heal and release what's going on sleep is the utmost non-resistant state, right? You can't get more undefended than when you're sleeping. So it's a beautiful way of healing, and I highly recommend it. And people always say, yeah, but I don't remember my dreams. That's okay. Then just keep practicing this. And when you wake up, you will always sense into what are you feeling when you wake up, and just write that down. And then what you'll see over time is that when you get into the discipline and the habit of trying to document your dreams, you start remembering more and more. I mean, it got to a stage with me where I actually had to turn off my dreams. I had to set an intention not to remember so many dreams. It can be kind of the floodgates opening. That is something all of us can do, Michael, and I highly recommend it.
It's interesting. I believe in holistic and naturopathic ways in approaching health, and I've been practicing that for wow, about 27 years now, somewhere thereabouts. And in regard to that, I know that when I've been faced with life challenges, we've spoken about a couple of them already in regard to me having to change my career. Of not my choice. I didn't come to that choice. It was made for me, which created some challenges within itself. If what would you? Let me see. Let me do this correctly. We all are faced with challenges in our life, whether major challenges, whether it be changing a job or wanting to get out of a situation, and or moving or finding a place to live, like we just spoke about. If we're faced with those, or a divorce, or something that we might be unexpected or might be expected, we all have to undergo that stress and that uncertainty and that what happens to me. And I know that negative energy always comes into that, because we always think of the worst first, right? No matter what situation comes about, innately we as human beings think of the worst first. Well, this happens, well, this is going to happen, then that's going to happen, this is going to happen. How do we prevent ourselves in going the negative route of energy when those life challenges come up, and turning it into a positive opportunity?
I'm not sure that avoiding the negativity is the answer. What I have found is when I'm going through major transitions in my life, it's actually best if I lean into that discomfort.
Mm.
And what I found, like, I'll give you a real example. Okay, so 3 years ago, I had two geriatric cats. They were ancient, they were like 21 years old.
Wow.
And they started getting kidney failure and they started getting sick, and I was facing into, and because they were both biological sisters, they were the
Mhm.
same age, I knew they were going to die at the same time. It was very stressful. And I'm going to give you a microcosm of what I'm talking about, and then we can kind of expand it from there. But so I was feeling incredibly overwhelmed. That was facing into a huge change. I got them with my ex. I landed up keeping them. They'd been with me for 2 decades. It's a major thing, and I loved them. And I was facing into loss. And I took myself off to the beach where I live. I live on a local beach, and I just walked the boardwalk, and I did some mindful walking because I find I work through a lot of shit when I do that.
Mhm.
And I was feeling grief. I tuned in, like, what is it that I'm feeling? And I felt grief. And I walked until I stopped feeling grief. I timed myself. It was 17 minutes of intensity, of weeping, of terror, of the whole gamut.
Mhm.
And I popped out of it. And I thought to myself, what's this telling? And I felt relief. I felt peace. Yes, the grief did come back again, but it was never that intense. And I realized that when we're going through change and when we're going through tough times, the worst thing that you can do is try and keep positive when you're actually feeling this low. You've got to allow the frequency to leave you. The human body can't hold on to such intense frequency for longer than, I don't know if it's 17 minutes, but it's somewhere around there,
Mhm.
right? We would implode. So it's the same thing with emotional pain. When you're feeling it, when you sit in it long enough, it leaves your frequency. That's why I always say, let the purge, let it It's just let it come up and out. And I have experienced, that's why I've built this 28-day program, because immersion is when you move through things fast. When you
Right.
dedicate, in that case, it was 17 minutes of my life. But in other cases, I dedicated 21 days to deal with anxiety. When you sit in the fire and you let stuff go, you move through, you process with love, with reverence, with peace about it, all of that good stuff. And you realize it's just low vibrational frequency leaving you, that's when you move through stuff faster and for good. And I know that
Mm.
because I've done it for myself. So there is no point trying to feel better when you're going through some really tough stuff. Let yourself feel the stuff
Right.
and watch what happens. So that's probably a hard answer, because it's all about authenticity. It's less about feeling happy. It's about, you can feel grief from a non-resistant state. You can
Yeah.
feel grief from a place of, I mean, I actually experienced the beauty of grief on that walk, which was tapping into how much I loved these two animals,
Right.
tapping into gratitude. You can go those places when you are really authentically processing a challenging emotion, and there's nothing worse than grief. It's really tough. So I would say rather go there, rather be there, but also temper that with self care, because you don't want to be, you want to also, you want your energy to oscillate. You want
Right.
it to, so that for me was self care, going for a walk, being in the sun. And that kind of, you'll find that you can't sit in the intensity of the pain for longer than a period of time. That's my word of
To
wisdom for
move forward.
everyone.
Well, it's brilliant because I mean, obviously, it gives us a better understanding to know that we're allowed. We have to give ourselves permission,
Yeah.
which we shouldn't have to give ourselves permission. It should just come naturally. But I think eventually it'll start coming naturally where we understand that, hey, this is okay. It's like the old cliche, men don't cry. Well, we do. You know what I
And you
mean?
should.
It's kind of
Yeah, we all, I know. I
exactly.
mean, there's
So,
such release when you cry, isn't it?
yeah,
After that 17 minutes, I felt bliss and relief and peace like I've not experienced before. And of course, the grief came back, but it never went as intense as
right.
that. Like I released something at a profound level. So I'm not, like, I understand that we have to be at a high vibration, okay? But I actually think we need to be, the state we need to be in when we are moving through these transitions is
Hmm.
less about being joyful, but it's more about being non resistant.
Yeah.
And I think one of the underrated energetic or emotional states is neutrality, striving for to feel neutral about something, that it doesn't get you in that same way. I think that that's a wonderful state to strive for when we're going through change, because you may not be
Yeah.
elated by what you're going through, but you're not resisting it. You're moving through it.
I agree with that. I think that's, yeah, it's a wonderful opportunity for us to really understand from the inside out that, you know,
Yeah.
we have choices for, even from that perspective. And kudos for having those kids. We lost three of ours that were 18 and 19. The one was brother and sister. They were born, around the same time, at the same time, not around, but they were 19 and the other one was 18. And we lost them all within a matter of probably a month from that. So
Yeah.
I recognize that with you. So it's difficult. It's hard, and you kind of, especially when they're all at the same time, and you kind of go, yeah. So I do understand that.
In
So
this
sorry.
case, it was 6 weeks, yeah. But also remember that my core wound was loss. I lost my father when I was 9. So death and dying was terrifying for me, and losing something that I loved so dearly. So I was in a serious life script. I was
But
dealing with my
yeah.
primary core wound. There's nothing you can't get through if you give it the time and love it needs to be released.
Well, that brings up. We're running out of time, but that brings up something that you mentioned earlier. But I learned this. I learned this in the last couple of years. A new term: the intergenerational trauma, and how you can cure intergenerational trauma, which is a unique perspective at looking about how trauma is brought forth through the generations and how it's implemented within our our soul, basically, and how we have to come out and deal with that. But that'd be another conversation. So we'll have to have another conversation
Love that.
and deal with
I
that.
love that.
In the meantime,
Yeah.
hey, let's talk about how somebody can get some of the help that they're looking for. We were talking about how to reach out and get some help if they need it, or aside from the tools. But how do they get in touch with you, and what do you offer?
Well, the main thing that I'm offering is you see the 28 days to healing there. That's my immersion. And it's a group process, it's a small group process, but it's very private. You don't have to, you know, be all in a group setting, although the lessons and the energy activations happen there. So that's 28 days. You pick one issue that's been tripping you up the most that you want to release. And I work with you in a group setting to release the root of that block and to call in the antidotal frequency, the frequency that's going to live instead of that into your body. So that is a guaranteed process of transformation. It's based off my own experience of sitting in the fire for 21 to 28 days. And then the soul solo is for people, it's not everyone. I love working with groups and I love being in groups and doing my work in groups. It's not for everyone. So the soul solo is for people who prefer an individualized journey. And it's great because your healing takes center stage. It's just you and me in the container. So there are a couple of options under the soul solo. There's the coaching option where I teach you, I heal you, but I also teach you. And then there are also healing packages, healing and activation packages. If you don't want to do anything, just lie back and you want me to do the work. That's what's there. So those are on my website, but I'm very active on Instagram. So I would welcome you connecting with me on Instagram, your listeners connecting on Instagram. If you can DM me, follow me. I'm very responsive. If that's not for you, then just go onto my website, which is www.generative.growth.com.au, and you'll see a multitude of ways to reach out to me there.
And your Instagram is right at the bottom of the screen there, so people can connect with that really easy. And I'll make sure that there's a link in the show notes so that people can easily just press a button and then they'll get in touch with you from that perspective.
That's good.
We could talk for a whole nother hour. There's so many more things we could cover, but I think this has been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate you sharing your journey and your wisdom and your experience with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for hosting this incredible platform where people can get their voices out and hopefully help others who are in need of hearing a message. So thank you so very much.
I appreciate that as well. Again, I'll make sure that everything's in the show notes so that they can find you quick and easy. This is one more thing before you go. Any words of wisdom before we leave?
Well, it's never too late is a big one. I was 50 when I made the changes. And also that if you really want real change, if you want lasting change, you've got to take your energy seriously. And energy is everything. Energy runs the show. So, start paying attention to it. And I guess, what's the word? Treating it in a way that you would, your physical body, your energetic body is actually even more potent. So that's the invitation.
That's amazing words of wisdom. Thank you very much for sharing those. Again, Gabrielle, thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it. And for all you out there that are watching and listening, one more thing before you all go. Have a great day. Have a great week. And thanks for being here.
Thanks for listening to this episode of One More Thing Before You Go. Check out our website at beforeyougopodcast.com. You can find us as well as subscribe to the program and rate us on your favorite podcast listening platform.